Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 2 hours worth of horror stories as per usual. We have stories ranging from truckers, we even have some space stuff in this one, just a whole bunch of different kinds of stories, so I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's go for 1200 likes on this video. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated, as I post content just like this as often as possible. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. Before I start, I feel like I should let something be very clear. I absolutely love Ellen. We've been living together for about 3 years now, but have known each other our whole lives. In fact, we were childhood friends. And I know this may sound like a fairy tale to some people, but it truly felt like we were always destined to be together. Even after graduation, when we started dating other people, it only felt truly right when we were with each other. So I don't know what took me so long to ask her out, but I'm really glad I did. We have the same taste in music, movies, and even food. We laugh at the same dumb jokes and know exactly how to comfort each other in times of need. She's the kindest, most gentle and loving girl I ever met. We even been talking about our plans for marriage and how we would like to have kids of our own. That's why it hurts so much how it all went terribly wrong in just 4 nights. I would also like to preface that Ellen doesn't have much of a family other than me, and some very distant aunts that she never met and doesn't even know their names. I was born in a big family, with 4 siblings and plenty of cousins that were always visiting, and even helping out when we got in trouble. Ellen has none of that. She doesn't have any siblings, and her father was an alcoholic, abusive freak that died when she was young. Her mother was a very kind and inspiring person that took care of the family by herself for many years, and almost a second mother to myself. So when she passed away last year, it hurt us both for a long time. But Ellen stayed strong. She's not the type to let her feelings easily surface, so you gotta be a lot more perceptive to get what she truly feels. I used to pride myself in being capable of that. I felt like I knew her better than I knew myself. That's why this is all so strange and, frankly, terrifying. We were sleeping in bed, and I was dreaming. I don't really remember what it was about, but for some reason I'm sure of it, until I heard her voice, very close to my ear. Knock, 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 knock. She was caressing my hair gently, while sitting in bed and looking below at me. I slowly opened my eyes, groggy from sleep. Hey, what is it, baby? She kept looking at me fixated and repeated, knock, 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 knock. I glanced at the digital clock on top of the dresser. 3:27 a.m. I had work in only a few hours. What is it, Ellen? She paused. Please answer the joke, dear. Knock, 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 knock. Fine, I accepted, mostly because I was expecting some kind of surprise. Ellen wasn't the type to do what she was doing for no reason. Who's there? Her smile opened up and she answered, Not me, so don't answer the door. I kept looking at her dumbfounded. What was that supposed to mean? Is that it? Is that the joke? Yes, she said, laying in the couch and covering herself with a blanket. Thank you for answering. Weirdo? I answered, closing my eyes and going back to sleep. Next morning, things went as usual. I only remembered the strange conversation while I was alone in the bathroom brushing my teeth, and wasn't even sure if it was what had truly happened or if it was just a weird dream. So we had our breakfast together, and she was acting normal, reading something aloud from a fashion magazine. Frankly, I wasn't paying much attention, so I took the opportunity to ask about last night. Initially, she didn't seem to know what I was talking about. Then her eyes fixated on me, and the same smile from last night crossed her face briefly. And I knew it wasn't just a dream. She told me it wasn't anything of importance and stopped paying attention when I asked more inquisitively. And even though I shouldn't, I gave up. I had work and other matters to attend to, and just brushed off the weird event thinking it wouldn't happen again. But the following night, I woke up to her voice. Knock, knock. A pause. Knock. What is it now? I said. Ellen, what are you doing? Knock, knock. Knock. She repeated. This time she wasn't even touching me, just sitting in bed, looking at me with that same smile, but her eyes seemed larger and she blinked in longer intervals. I looked at the clock. Once again, 3:27 a.m. Ellen, come on. What is it? I got work in a few hours. Can't have the luxury of waking up in the middle of the night to answer knock-knock jokes. Knock, knock. Knock. This is getting creepy, you know. I'm not sure if this is some gag you've been doing, but I don't like it. Answer it. Knock, knock. Knock. I sighed, but also let a small laugh escape. It was creepy, of course, but she was also my Ellen, so it didn't bother me as much as it should. Fine, who the fuck is there? I answered in a playful tone. Not me, so don't answer the door. For some reason, I felt a chill down in my spine. It was the same answer as before, and I still didn't get what it meant. But the way she said it, with a strange, monotone voice, contrasted well with her smile, and the fact that I had no idea of what she meant by that. What does that mean? I asked. I really don't get it. She just smiled and went back to sleep. I felt a throb in my heart, but did the same. Next day, we talked again about what was happening. She was very evasive with my questions, and I barely got her to say anything. It was almost as if she couldn't talk about it, which was very strange, considering we talk about pretty much everything. I told her I needed to be well rested for work, something she should understand well, and wasn't liking her little gag every night. She just nodded, and I decided to not press further, as I didn't want to hurt her feelings and had work to attend to. When I got back home, we had dinner, watched a movie, and went to bed. Knock, knock. I opened my eyes faster this time around. In fact, I barely got any sleep. I just knew she would do it again, and kept thinking about it the whole time. I glanced at the clock. 3:27 a.m. Knock, knock. I thought about ignoring her, just pretending I was asleep and she wouldn't wake me up. So I closed my eyes slowly, hoping that she hadn't seen me opening them in the first place, and stayed quiet. Knock, knock. I'm not answering your fucking joke, Ellen. Stop it. Knock, knock. I ignored, but she kept going. She had never been this insistent with anything before. I tried to ignore it, but it was getting on my nerves, and frankly, I felt scared. Why was Ellen doing this? Why every night? At the exact same time down to the minute? Why wouldn't she let me sleep until I answered her? Knock, knock. I got up in a sudden movement. God damn it, Ellen. I was ready for a discussion, but when I finally glanced at her, it was as if the strength was drained from me. She wasn't smiling, she wasn't blinking, just staring right at me, fixated like an animal, and her mouth was moving slowly and she didn't stop. Knock, knock. I didn't know how to react or what expression I had when I saw her, but my heart skipped a beat. It was terrifying, as if her gaze froze me in place, a 1,000-yard stare. Knock, knock. Who's there? I asked, feeling as if it was the only way out of that nightmare. Not me, so don't answer the door, she said weakly. Ellen slowly closed her eyes and laid down. I kept staring at her while she fell into what seemed to be a deep sleep. I got up and left. I walked downstairs and sat down at the couch in the living room, staring at the night sky outside and absorbing the quiet of the neighborhood. My heart was beating fast and it didn't slow down. I was too scared to sleep in the same room as my girlfriend, all because of a fucking knock-knock joke. But it was unnatural. I thought about calling someone. I thought about it all being some kind of sleep-related issue, such as some type of sleepwalking, but it didn't make any sense. I felt so tired, and decided that early in the morning, I would call an old friend who's a psychologist and get the opinion of a professional. Something was wrong with Ellen. I stayed on the couch as the day rose, and once Ellen woke up, she was acting normal again. Even asked why I wasn't in bed. I didn't answer. In fact, I didn't speak to her and simply left for work. She seemed very upset, but I wouldn't do anything about it. Once I got to work, I called my friend, told him everything that was happening in as much detail as I'm describing now. He didn't seem as worried as I figured, but we agreed on making an appointment for next week. Now I just needed to convince Ellen to come with me. I received plenty of text messages from her. She seemed very worried, sad, and even confused. She apologized a lot, and it broke my heart a little. I felt bad. I shouldn't have, but I answered her and made her promise it wouldn't happen again. I also told her about the appointment, and she seemed reluctant but agreed to go with me. So we made up. This was Ellen, after all. The girl I knew ever since I was 6 years old. The woman I loved and that had taken care of me for years. And as much as that strange behavior creeped me out, she wasn't doing anything particularly frightening or even dangerous. So for a brief while, I convinced myself I should give her another chance. When I returned home from work, we stayed together. She even prepared my favorite meal. Ellen was acting as gentle and caring as I always remembered, and I slept with her in our bedroom, even though I was still a bit reluctant. Knock. I couldn't believe it. She promised me she wouldn't. Knock. I gazed at the clock. 3:27 a.m. Always. Knock. I was laying on my stomach and I couldn't see her face. In fact, I didn't even bother to look at her. I was feeling more sad than scared at this point. Sad that she had broken her word. Knock. Who's there? I answered, determined to just go back to sleep. Not me, so don't answer the door. I stayed quiet and closed my eyes. I just hoped I would be able to handle it until the appointment next week. To my surprise, I was actually able to sleep, probably because I hadn't been able to rest since last night. The following morning, I went back to not saying anything to Ellen, only very limited responses. I was expecting her to act the same as yesterday, trying to apologize, but she didn't. Mostly she didn't say anything, almost as if she had accepted it. She also looked tired, or at least a bit weak. I went to work, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. Didn't receive any messages either. Once I got back, we had the most silent dinner I ever had in my life, and she barely ate anything. I decided to let her have the bedroom and sleep on the couch. I wasn't sure if it would stop her, but held on to the hope that she wouldn't go downstairs, only to tell me the same knock-knock joke again. I covered myself with a blanket, shaked off that uneasy feeling, and tried to sleep. I had a deep sleep without dreams. Felt like I was lost in darkness. Then I heard breathing. Opened my eyes to see Ellen standing above me, looking at me with a big, fixated eyes and dilated pupils that didn't seem to belong in such a completely neutral expression, watching me sleep. I almost screamed in terror. Jumped out of the couch, and her eyes followed me as I stumbled through the dark room, creating distance between us. For a moment, I was able to glance at the clock above the table. 3:27 a.m. Ellen, what are you doing? I asked, desperate, but she didn't move. In fact, she didn't say anything, just stared at me as if I was made of glass and she could see right through me. Then I heard a knock on the front door. Instinctively, I looked in that direction. It was followed by another knock and another. Someone almost pounding at the door. I glanced back at Ellen and she was still staring at me. Slowly I got closer to the door and she didn't move. The pounding continued. "Who's there?" I screamed. It stopped and then I heard a voice. "John? John, can you hear me? Open the door, please. John, please open the door." I froze in place. The voice kept calling me, but I couldn't believe it. It was Ellen's voice, coming from the other side of the door, but it couldn't be. "I beg you, John. Open the door, it's serious. She's not me, I swear. She's not me." Slowly, I turned my head to look at Ellen, standing in front of the couch. She was looking at me, the same fixated eyes and a terrible, wide grin across her face. The pounding continued. "John, open the door. Please, you have to trust me." I stayed still, not knowing what to do, and I don't remember what happened after that. I just woke up in my bedroom. The digital clock indicates it's 4:21 a.m. Ellen isn't by my side. I'm completely alone. I'm trembling uncontrollably, and I don't know what's going on. I don't remember what happened after I saw her terrible grin. I don't know if I opened the door. I tried to look at my phone, see if I could call the police or at least someone that I know, but I left it downstairs. All I have is Ellen's laptop, and it's where I'm writing this right now to get advice, because I can't go downstairs. The corridor is dark, very dark, almost as if the shadows were leaning into the room, and I can hear a faint scratching sound coming from below. What should I do? I swear it all started out innocently enough. My wife, Carol, and I had fallen on hard times due to the pandemic. She'd gotten laid off from her position, and my hours have been cut due to our clients tightening up their purses the last couple of years. We had a toddler, Marcia, and a cat to feed, as well as ourselves. It was eating up our savings. We didn't want to be out of home. We were terrified. One night while we were sitting at home, she had, at least I thought, jokingly talked about creating an OnlyFans. We toyed with the idea a bit, and eventually her face got more serious, and she started talking numbers. I loved Carol. I trusted her, and honestly, we could use the money. We talked for a while longer about it, what our boundaries were on. We agreed that it wouldn't be anything outright lewd or erotic, and she suggested the idea of eating in front of a camera. Apparently it's a thing. Whatever, I guess. I agreed. It seemed harmless enough. It started out harmless. We set up a camera in our spare office facing the desk. Every other night, we would order takeout and eat in there while filming. She would post it wherever online. Things carried on normally like this for a couple of months. She'd order her own food, stuff herself in the other room while we ate at the dining table. I'll admit, the money was good. Good enough that it actually surpassed what she would have been making working a normal job. Carol bumped up to filming once a day. One day at lunch, and the other day at dinner. Of course she gained some weight, but hell, I'm no prime example of vigorous health. As the weeks went on, she spent more and more time filming these eating videos. We paid off the remainders of our auto loan. We put down a good chunk on our mortgage. We were able to start a college fund for Marcia. Our savings account was looking healthier than ever. Her health, however, wasn't looking too hot. She'd begun to lose breath quicker than usual. Eventually, she stopped coming on our family walks in the park. It wasn't a big deal. Just a couple times a week we would go to stretch our legs. After a while, she said she would prefer to stay home for the time being. At this point, I started to get a bit more concerned. No amount of money is worth throwing away your health, even if our insurance would cover whatever came up. I remember talking to her about it, that maybe she should slow down with her project, and maybe even cut it off entirely. She was furious with me. She cried. She asked if I still loved her. Of course I told her I do. I did. She was the love of my life. She'd given us our beautiful daughter. I caved in and just pleaded with her to be careful. As a few more months passed, we saw her less and less. She moved a television into the office. She got a larger, more comfortable chair to sit in. She'd gained so much weight in half a year, I didn't think it was possible. And I knew sure as hell that it wasn't healthy. She was having trouble standing without aid, and it seemed like she almost wouldn't fit through the door to the office if she tried. I confronted Carol once more about it, and I swear I have never seen my wife get so furious. She was red in the face as she waved her hand around the house. "Keep your goddamn nose out of my business. This entire house and you are being paid for by my work. If you don't support me here, then I will find someone who does." Our daughter had peeked in and began crying. It was horrible to see her like that. I couldn't argue with her. She did support us at this point. I began to take her meals in to her, at her demand. She would take the food and glare at me until I left the room again. Any further attempts I made at making her see sense was met with threats of divorce, of taking the kids, of destroying my life. I guess I justified myself in being part of this. At least the rest of us were comfortable. Money wasn't an issue to us anymore, and that particular nightmare is not one I ever want to revisit. I used to think financial troubles were the worst kind of nightmare I'd ever face. And honestly, they're still up there. A year passed. Her mood got worse and worse, and Carol got more and more obsessed with her followers. I never thought I would describe my wife as looking monstrous, but it almost seemed as if her limbs had begun to shrink. Her arms and legs looked more spindly, useless attachments to her mass. Her neck had fattened to the point that it looked like her head was attached directly to her massive torso. Her mouth seemed much wider than before, and she was almost always sweating. She began to scream at me for more food, always more. She would sob if she didn't get it. I had to. I didn't want her to suffer. I never wanted her to suffer. Our cat disappeared 1 month ago. It happened on a night when I had taken Marcia out to the playground. Carol had texted me, "I am hungry. Bring me something now." I texted back that we were at the park. We wouldn't be back for another half hour or so. "I am starving." We got back with a couple large pizzas for her. Our cat is a bit shy, so I didn't notice until much later in the day he was gone. God, I just assumed we'd left a window open or something. I swore I was crazy. Carol's limbs actually looked like they were getting shorter, retreating within her. She did not look like my wife. Maybe it wasn't my wife. The next week I was looking through our accounts for the first time in a while. Her deposits had stopped a month ago. She didn't listen to anything I say. I told her she needed to see a doctor. She couldn't stand up. I began to cut back on how much food I would bring in to her, but it didn't seem to halt her growth, which was noticeable on the daily now. All it did was enrage her. She would get red, her face contorted into a snarl, spittle flying from her wide mouth. She would point a shriveled, atrophied arm and scream curses, her eyes beady and full of fury, recessed into her massive head. Her hair had begun to fall out. I was so terrified. I couldn't go in and feed her that last day. I could hear screaming. Then she called for our daughter. Marcia went in. Marcia did not come out. I got worried. I opened the door. I saw Marcia's foot laying at the base of the monster that used to be my wife. She ate my daughter. God, she ate my daughter. When I saw it, I couldn't move for what felt like hours, but I know it wasn't. The monster saw my look of horror. I don't know what happened. I saw the monster move for the first time since it consumed my wife I don't know how many months ago. It heaved itself off its perch. It almost seemed to slither, drag itself over towards the door. The door frame of the office began to creak horribly and bulge outwards before I came to. I ran. I got in the car. I drove. I'm out now. My God. My daughter. What happened to my wife? What have I done? About a month ago, my 5-year-old daughter, who I'll call Dee, got a sudden interest in photography. She probably saw someone with a camera on TV and decided that she wanted one. For 2 weeks, she begged us for a camera, and me and my husband decided that we wanted to support her and her interests. We bought her a simple and cheap digital camera and gifted it to her. We taught her how to use it, which wasn't much more than pointing and clicking, and told her that she would get her favorite photos printed. Dee took her camera everywhere with her and took pictures of everything. We often had to delete a lot of blurry photos to make room for more. She was very good at following rules too, such as don't take other people's pictures without their permission, don't point the camera at the sun, and always wear the wrist strap. Me and my husband were very proud and hoped that we were raising a future photographer. Last week, I had a day off, so I decided to go run some errands. I brought Dee along since my husband was at work and there was no one to watch her. She didn't mind though, as long as she could bring her camera, she was happy. We ran by the post office, the bank, and lastly a large clothing store, as I needed a new blouse for a party that was coming up. Dee and I walked inside and she instantly started to snap pictures of some sparkly dresses. I mostly ignored her as I looked around, keeping her in the corner of my eye. I looked through some shirts on one of those round racks, and Dee decided to push through them and duck inside. She did this often, as many kids do. She giggled away, and I let her be, and looked around at some other racks. After a few minutes I called her, wanting to move on to a different section. She didn't answer me. "Come on, Dee, you can't stay in there," I said. I couldn't hear any giggling, and she wasn't responding. I walked over to the rack and spread the shirts to look inside. Dee wasn't there. I called out to her, telling her to come to me. I looked around, but couldn't see her anywhere. This is when I started to panic a little. I had been keeping my eyes on that rack, and knew that I didn't see her come out, but she had to be close by. I quickly walked around the area, looking inside other racks and calling out to her more. She was nowhere, and I started to really panic. I rushed to the checkout counter nearby and asked the cashier if she had seen her. "Is your child missing?" the cashier asked me. I told her the situation and she spoke into the microphone on her collar. "We have a missing child, most recently seen in women's formal." My heart was beating so fast, and I could feel my face was red. I was embarrassed, worried that I looked like a terrible mom, but as long as Dee was found, it would all be okay. "The other employees are searching the store for her now. Can you tell me what she looks like?" the cashier asked me. I told her, and she repeated it into her microphone. "Okay, ma'am, thank you. We have security by the front door to make sure she doesn't leave the store," she said. I didn't even want to think about the possibility that someone could take her. I went to look some more, calling out Dee's name, telling her that she wasn't in trouble and to just come out. Dee was always so well behaved. She never ran off like this. 20 minutes went by, and I was in full panic mode with tears forming in my eyes. Suddenly I heard crying. I recognized it as Dee instantly. I followed it, running across the store. I came to the same round rack that Dee had hidden inside initially. I looked inside and sure enough, there she was. I pulled her out as she sobbed and picked her up. I assumed that she had gone back inside the rack when I wasn't looking. I asked her if she was alright. and why she was crying. "There was nobody," she said. I was confused and asked her what she meant. "Nobody anywhere." I didn't know what she was talking about, so I asked her again. "All alone." She was in hysterics. I pet her head and went back to the checkout and told the cashier that I had found her. She told her microphone that Dee had been found and called off the search. I was relieved, but worried. Did a stranger try to take her, or did she just get lost for a bit? I took her home and put her in bed for a nap and told my husband what had happened when he got home. Later that night, Dee was doing better. I asked her if I could see her photos from that day, as it always cheered her up when me and my husband looked at them. She gave me her camera, and I scrolled through the photos. There was some of the post office, some of the bank, and lots of photos of clothes. I cannot explain the last few photos. It was the clothing store, except there were no people. That didn't make sense, as there were lots of people in the store when we were there. There were lots of photos of the empty store, even one of the checkout counter without the cashier there. She had taken a photo of the front door and several of the parking lot. The parking lot was empty. There were no cars, no people, nothing. You could see the street, and there was no traffic in sight. No wonder Dee had cried so hard. She was all by herself, some place where there were no people. I don't know where Dee had gone, but I worry every day now. What if somehow she gets taken back? I work for NASA as an astronomer, and there are certain things we keep hidden from the public. No, the Earth isn't flat, and aliens don't control the government. Fuck, I wish those were the case, as the truth is much, much worse. In 1993, the Hubble Space Telescope saw a star disappear. It didn't go supernova or die naturally. It simply went dark over the span of a few minutes. The star was already too faint to see with the naked eye, and ground-based telescopes had trouble picking it out from among the surrounding stars. So the event wasn't widely known to the public. At the time, we thought the most likely explanation was that a cloud of interstellar dust had drifted between Earth and the star, occluding it from view. It was noted and mostly forgotten about. In 2007, 2 more stars vanished. Due to the circumstances of this event, this was much more concerning. The 2 stars in question were part of a binary system, orbiting each other at a fairly close distance. If a cloud of interstellar dust was the culprit again, they would have both seemed to disappear simultaneously, or very close to it. Instead, both stars faded individually over a period of minutes, separated by a span of about 8 hours. This binary system was also about 15 light-years closer to Earth than the star that had previously disappeared in 1993. After carefully reviewing millions of Hubble images, 2 more stars were identified which had gone out in the years 1995 and 2002. These were all in the same stellar neighborhood, only a handful of light-years from each other. The only conclusion we could draw was that some unknown influence traveling close to the speed of light was shrouding, or destroying, these stars. Unfortunately, the Hubble wasn't sensitive enough to tell us any more than that. The James Webb Space Telescope first came online a few months ago. Although official channels will tell you that it's still undergoing testing, we have been actively collecting data since early February. One of the first things we did was to aim the telescope at the regions of space occupied by the vanished stars. If they were being blocked by dust clouds, a hope some of us still held on to, the increased sensitivity of the JWST may have been able to see through them and confirm that the stars were still there. Unfortunately, we had no such luck. The first 3 stars that had disappeared were still completely dark. Gravitational wave detectors, though, soon found something odd. In all cases, not only were the stellar masses still present, but the amount of mass had actually increased. More sensitive observations had also detected a type of string or web stretching through space connecting these now invisible stars. When we trained the telescope on the binary system that had vanished in 2007, which was the nearest point at which the phenomena had so far been observed, there was finally enough ambient EM spectrum radiation left to try a mass spectrometer reading. If you're not aware, mass spectrometry is an incredibly useful process, whereby measuring the patterns of light wavelengths emitted or reflected by an object, we can learn tons of useful information, such as its temperature, speed, and direction of movement, and chemical composition. The readings we got from the binary stars didn't make any sense though. First of all, they were cold. Almost as cold as the surrounding interstellar medium. Whatever had happened to these stars had snuffed them out completely, or somehow prevented their light from escaping. What was truly puzzling, however, were the emission lines returned by the mass spectrometer. Several familiar elements such as hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and magnesium were identified, but these were few and far between. Most of the readings didn't correspond to any known chemical elements, and even seemed to defy what we knew about the physics of light, matter, and chemistry. This massive, star-spanning structure was primarily composed of materials that we didn't even have names for, and may not even have been matter as we understand it. Speculation ran rampant. Obviously, such a thing couldn't be a natural phenomenon. Finally, we had proof of extraterrestrial life. But what was this thing we had discovered, and for what purpose was it being built? The leading hypothesis was that we were looking at a series of Dyson shells, massive solar collectors built to completely envelop stars, in order to capture 100% of their energy output. Such a concept has been envisioned in the early 20th century as a potential source of energy for an interstellar civilization. Ever since then, the idea had found its way into popular science fiction. The construction of these massive structures had actually been theorized to be one of the first signs of intelligent extraterrestrial life that we may someday detect. It seemed that day was today. The theory still didn't explain everything though. First of all, there was the impossible speed with which the stars were covered. Constructing a Dyson shell from scratch in a matter of minutes was beyond even the wildest speculations of scientists and sci-fi writers. Then there were the mysterious filaments that connected the shells over distances of light years. No one had any idea what purpose these could serve, or how they could even be built. Everyone at NASA was fascinated by this mystery. In hindsight, we may have been better off if we had never discovered the truth. Less than a month ago, the JWST detected a series of unusual energy bursts emanating from interstellar space. These were occurring at the very edge of a star system approximately 12 light-years from the binary system that vanished in 2007. As we focused the telescope on this system, we soon determined that these were not natural phenomena either. The energy signatures, which were still flashing intermittently, meshed what would be expected from thermonuclear and antimatter-based explosions, along with several other types of energies that we couldn't identify. These explosions, although still not visible to the naked eye on Earth from that distance, were absolutely tremendous in magnitude, easily billions of times more powerful than any nuke that humanity could conceivably build. After experimenting with the telescope settings, we were able to get a clearer picture of what was going on. The tip of one of the interstellar filaments that linked the Dyson system was passing through the Oort cloud of the distant star system, approaching its sun, and whoever lived there was fighting back. The weapons were able to slow the thing's advance, shattering, breaking off, and vaporizing planet-sized chunks of the object. but it seemed to be rebuilding itself almost as fast as it was being destroyed. After less than a week, the explosion stopped. It seemed that they had run out of ammunition. In the void between stars, we knew that these things traveled at nearly the speed of light, but as we watched it approach the inner star system, its pace slowed as it swelled in size, preparing to devour the system's star. We quickly trained the telescope's mirrors on the doomed sun. We were about to watch whatever this thing was blot out another star, but in real time. We all held our breaths as we watched the projected image of the main sequence star, slightly larger than our own sun. At first, nothing seemed to be happening, but soon a small shadow appeared on the edge of the luminous orb, soon followed by another shadow, and then a third. The shadows began to converge, forming a strange yet somehow familiar pattern as they blocked out the star's light. "What are those?" One of my colleagues gasped. "They almost look like..." She paused as if afraid to say the next word for fear of ridicule. I, however, had no such hesitancy. "Leaves," I said, my voice monotone. The situation was far too incredible to express any emotional reaction, even that of pure shock. "They look like leaves." We watched as, over a period of minutes, a web of shadowy outlines, matching the familiar shapes of oblong leaves and thin vines, proceeded to blot out the remaining light from the distant star. By that point, everyone in the room had realized the truth. The phenomena we had been tracking for so many years wasn't some hyper-advanced alien megastructure. Hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and magnesium. Some of the familiar elements we had detected, they were all components of chlorophyll. It was a plant, an enormous plant that spanned across light years, and, much like terrestrial plants, it sought out light to fuel itself. The filaments connecting the stars across interstellar space were stems and branches. It would grow in the direction of the nearest stars it sensed, completely enveloping them and then moving on. Any life inhabiting planets orbiting those stars would be left to freeze to death, or perhaps even worse. It was possible that the plant would devour those planets to add to its mass as well. Everyone was silent as the telescope continued to gather data. Eventually, after what seemed like an eternity, a young astronomer spoke up from the far end of the room, addressing our supervisor. "Sir, we've begun to detect the formation of another tendril, leaving the system. Its vector is..." He gulped. He didn't need to say any more, but he did anyway. "It's heading directly for our sun." "How much time do we have?" The supervisor replied grimly. "Judging by the time lag, distance, relative properties, and previously observed speeds of this thing, I'd estimate no more than 27 years, sir." 27 years. We had just watched this galactic weed overwhelm a civilization that was, at the very least, thousands of years ahead of us technologically, and we had less than 3 decades. I'll probably be found in silence for posting this, but I don't care. I have to tell someone. I can't keep this a secret any longer. When the sun turns black and the world begins to freeze, at least you'll have some idea of what's going on. Small comfort it may be. I recently moved to this new suburban district in my city that recently finished construction. It's my first ever house that I own. Well, me and my fiance own. A lot of people living around the district are glad that it finally finished, as the construction noises have been going on almost non-stop for nearly a decade. My childhood home is quite close to the district, so I remember the constant noise of construction machines pretty well as it started back in my early teenage years. I always wondered why it would never stop, even at night, but I brushed it off as it being connected to some bureaucratic nonsense that I simply don't understand. I honestly really like the area. At first, I was unsure about buying a house in the area since half of it is built on grounds once occupied by a large metal refinery. However, I like it here than I would ever have imagined. Our neighbors are friendly, there's good public transportation, how close my parents live, etc. This place was meant to be just simple suburban real estate, but they had added space for a few small grocery stores in the planning process, turning it into a proper district. Basically, we have everything we need at arm's reach. Last Saturday, I noticed that a lot of lampposts in the neighborhood had loudspeakers attached to them. I asked my seemingly all-knowing neighbor about it, and he said that they are for emergency warning signals. We do get the occasional heavy snowstorm in the winter, usually followed by a decent flood in spring. The loudspeakers could be for extreme weather warnings, although no other district in the city has such speakers. They presumably have these here, in the newest district to test it out, right? Stuff like that is usually mentioned on the news, but I haven't heard from it. I suppose I just have missed it, I thought to myself. On Tuesday, I got off work super late. I work on the other side of the city at a telecom company as an IT specialist. Basically, we had some internet issues in the office ourselves, and it took us nearly 2 hours to find out that the Ethernet cable was crushed under a desk and had broken. As it's summer and my car's air conditioning is broken at the moment, I drove home with the windows down. It was midnight, so I didn't expect much traffic. Arriving at my home district, I started to notice a high-pitched ringing noise coming from the outside. The wind in my ears, I assumed it was just crickets going wild tonight. When I got home, though, the ringing noise was definitely something else. Does anyone know that high-pitched squealing noise some cars' brakes do? I think it's because the brake discs are dirty or something. It's super annoying and makes you tear your ears out. Anyways, it was that noise, only constant and never ending. This high-pitched squealing noise. At first I couldn't make out where it was coming from, but I soon realized that it's probably the loudspeakers. I quickly grabbed my bag and ran inside once the noise was killing me. I threw my bag by the couch, and before going to bed, I wrote the local council about the loudspeakers and told them that they seemed to be broken, playing this painful note all night long. The next day, I checked my email all day for a response. Around 3 in the afternoon, they finally responded. They claimed that the speakers were turned off at night and no noise was transmitted from them. They asked if I had a video recording of the noise. I didn't, but wrote that I'll see if I can get it on video tonight. That night, I intentionally left work late to see if I hear the noise again. When I got home, though, I heard no noises besides the occasional car driving by or the gust of wind. I went straight to bed, however my fiancée wasn't sleeping. In fact, she wasn't anywhere in the house. I called her. It rang for a bit before it hung up, and I got a text saying, "Randomly went out with the besties and lost track of time. I'll be home in 15 minutes. I was tired, so I texted her, "Alright, no worries," and went to bed. The next morning, she felt that her entire body was sore. I joked about what they might have done last night for her to be so tired, but she promised that she had no idea what made her body feel so numb. I laughed it off until I checked out the district's Facebook page. People all across the district were complaining about their sore and numb arms, legs, and backs. Such pain is usually related to lifting heavy things. Most who live here currently are either young children or their parents. Nobody really stays up late besides on special occasions like I did. The next couple of days have made everything even more confusing. Some people have woken up with burns on their body, and my lower back aches like crazy. I went to the doctor and she said to be more careful when lifting heavy things. The thing is that I definitely haven't lifted anything very heavy in the past week. Whatever is happening to everyone, it's happening to me too. Another update happened today. Someone decided to set up a camera in their bedroom and set up a motion sensor to detect recording when moving is detected. They uploaded it to the Facebook group and well, it's interesting. The clip wasn't long, about 10 seconds, but it showed how the guy got up from his bed at night, wandered to the camera and covered it with a blanket. His face was clearly seen in the video. It was a cold stare, no emotions whatsoever, not even tiredness. The final 5 seconds of the video seemed like he walked to the door and left the bedroom. The man himself said that he has no recollection about doing anything like that in the video. Some people called it a hoax, just something to stir up drama. Most people thought it was real though. Some commented that they had recently found themselves in odd places around their homes. Most have no record of ever sleepwalking before. The conversation about people sleepwalking continued for a few hours before the entire Facebook group was hacked and turned into a page advertising crypto scams. I heard from some people around the neighborhood that it was a deliberate hack to cover something up, that we were getting too close to the truth. Personally, I don't know what to do. I feel like we should temporarily move to my parents' house and think about the whole thing. My fiance thinks that it's just some weird phenomenon and will pass quickly. We had our first ever fight over this just this morning. I suppose I'll ask my parents what they think, and if we even can move to their place. If we can, then I'll try my best to convince my fiance to move there. If I need to, I'll drag her with me no matter how much she wants to stay. There's no way she's staying here without me. This story happened 5 years ago, but it still freaks me out to this day. I'm a long-haul truck driver. I've been doing it for most of my adult life. I love the freedom it provides. Out on the open road, not stuck behind a desk wearing a suit and tie. I would hate that. I prefer being by myself and getting to travel to new places. Anyway, on the night this incident took place, I had just stopped for the night to cross from a little diner right outside of middle of nowhere, Nevada. I figured I would grab a bite to eat before getting some sleep for the night. The diner was pretty empty, except for a guy leaning over what looked like a cup of coffee in the far corner, and a young couple in one of the booths. I grabbed a seat at the counter, setting my hat down in front of me. An older woman with permed red hair and thick Coke bottle glasses approached me from behind the counter. She was holding a pot of coffee in one hand, while the other hand was resting on her hip in a "I'm too old and too tired to be doing this" expression. "What can I get ya?" she asked in a very unenthusiastic tone. I'll take a club sandwich, please, and a water." The overworked and underpaid waitress nodded and then headed over to the couple in the booth. The young woman was laughing her head off at something the guy had said. I turned my attention to the small TV with the antenna situated on top like a pair of rabbit ears. It was late night news, and the reporter was covering a story most people had probably already read about online a few hours ago. Something about a missing prisoner. Yikes. I had never thought much about the dangers of sleeping on the road until that very moment. I mean, I obviously always locked my doors and tried to park in a well-lit area, if there was one, but other than that, I had never really considered the inherent risks of sleeping in usually sketchy areas with just my flashlight for protection. I know truck drivers are usually thought of as big, burly, intimidating men, but I'm a normal height, average build guy just looking to do my job. I picked up one of the little creamer cups out of the dish on the counter and started rolling it over in my fingers. The handsome reporter on the TV had handed things off to the even better looking blonde woman giving the winning lotto numbers. The door to the kitchen swung open, and the waitress emerged with my food and drink balanced on one of those circular black trays. Thank God. I was starving. I hadn't eaten since early that morning, and that was just half of a Pop-Tart. Thank you, I said as she set the plate in front of me. Uh-huh, she muttered as she disappeared back into the kitchen. I had just taken a bite out of my sandwich when the lights overhead started to flicker. There was a faint buzzing noise that went along with it, like an overloaded wire. Well, that wasn't too surprising. This diner looked like it hadn't been upgraded since the 50s, with the ripped upholstery in most of the seats and the faded blue paint on the walls. It would be surprising to learn that this building's electricity still ran off vacuum tubes. I continued eating, not really caring why the lights continued their occasional strobing. I had begun to pull out the small, thin book of crosswords I carried around in the front pocket of my denim jacket, when I heard the sound of the door opening and closing behind me. Two large men dressed in black suits entered the diner, both looking around before pointing in the direction of the man sitting by himself in the corner. I continued watching them as I ate. The man at the table was wearing a sweatshirt with the hood pulled over his head, his hands folded neatly on the table in front of him, like a man deep in prayer. It was hard to make out his expression because his face was obscured not only by the hood, but also from the long dark hair sweeping across the bridge of his nose past his chin. I swallowed, then took a sip of water as I watched the men in suits sit across from the hooded man. One of the suit guys was pointing a finger at the man, and then pointing the same finger up towards the ceiling. The hooded man continued sitting there, not moving a muscle. I finished off the rest of my food, and finished off the water in a tidy little gulp before standing up and fishing my wallet out of my back pocket. I peeled a $10 bill off the large bundle of ones and laid it on the counter. It was right as I put my hat back on and turned to leave that the lights went out again, only this time they stayed out. That's about the same time the waitress came crashing through the swinging door from the kitchen, screaming at the top of her lungs that she couldn't see. At first I thought that she was having a very dramatic reaction to the lights being out, but then I realized she actually meant something far worse. Blood was running from underneath those thick black glasses, onto the grease-stained apron which hung from her neck. "God, help me!" she screamed, running like a chicken with its head cut off. I was just about to lunge over the counter to help her when another scream shouted out from my right. This one was the young man that was sitting with his girlfriend. Only he wasn't the one who was hurt. His girlfriend had collapsed onto the floor, violently convulsing on the ground as she started to foam at the mouth. "Holy shit, somebody call 911, the young man shouted. He was kneeling next to the girl, cradling her head in his arms. "Oh my God," I shouted as I sprinted through the front door of the diner. As I was running, I noticed the man that had been sitting in the corner. His hood was off, and he was standing now, as the two suited men lay by his feet. There was something horribly wrong about his face, but I couldn't tell exactly what it was in my hurry to get out to my truck. My phone was in there, and I needed it if there was any hope of getting these people help. I ran across the silent, empty street, and then slammed into my driver's side door. I frantically moved all my papers and empty wrappers around before finding my phone next to the seat. I dialed 911 and looked back across the street at the diner. My mouth dropped open as the dispatcher's voice said, "Hello? Hello?" into my ear. The small building was completely engulfed in flames. Smoke was rising up into the night sky, obscuring the view of the stars. Against the backdrop of that orange fireball was the figure of a man, slowly walking towards me. I threw the phone into the truck and climbed into the driver's seat. I locked the doors and looked through the windshield. The man was gone. I pulled my keys out of my pocket with trembling hands and started the engine. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal and turned onto the road. That's when I saw him. He was standing in the middle of the street, perfectly still, watching my truck as I drove away. Only this time I could actually see his face. And that is what still gives me nightmares to this day. His face was illuminated by the fire, and I could see that the skin was pale white, paler than snow, and the eyes were even whiter than that. There were no eyebrows, and the lips were turned upwards into an awful sneer, exposing the rows of long yellow teeth within its mouth. I escaped that day, but I know he is still out there. It is still out there, and it may be coming for you next. I live in an apartment complex that sits in a outer part of town. The nearest market is half an hour away, but the price of my home is worth it. I live with my roommate Caleb, and together we pay about $5.50. It's a fairly nice place with 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen and dining space, and a living room. The appliances are fairly nice, and it feels like I'm getting much more than I'm paying for. But the one freaky thing about this place is the neighbors. For background, Caleb has a French bulldog named King that lives with us. Or, well, he had one. One evening we were off to the store for some generic groceries. There was a break-in. Nothing was broken except for the window used to enter the house, and nothing was taken except for King. We put up posters, asked neighbors, but we saw no sign of him. It was devastating for the both of us as we loved this dog tremendously. A week or so later, there was a smell coming from the office building of our apartments. It wasn't a bad smell. It smelled like the Texas barbecue I grew up with. I went to investigate and saw a bunch of my neighbors gathered around some picnic tables and a grill. They were all wearing the same generic black robe draped around their shoulders. There was about 20 to 30 people gathered, wearing and eating the same thing. Maybe this was some neighborhood tradition I didn't get the memo of. One of my older neighbors, Casey, sat me down and handed me a plate. She offered me a robe, but I objected. I took a bite of the meat on the plate and got a flashback of home. It tasted marvelous. I had never had such good barbecue. I asked the manager of the cookout about it, but he didn't reveal his secrets. Whatever mysterious family recipe this was, I'd definitely eat it again. As Caleb arrived from work, he noticed the cookout and joined us. He didn't eat any of the food, nor did he take a robe. He quickly grabbed me without reason and took me home. He lectured me on how this was some creepy cult meeting and I shouldn't be participating. After reviewing the thoughts in my head, I completely agreed. But that was just a weird one-off thing my neighbors did, right? You'd be mistaken. The apartment above me belongs to an old guy from England. His accent stuck out like a sore thumb, but he was the most popular person among the neighborhood. He would hold large get-togethers at his house every other Sunday. They aren't loud, more so the opposite. I don't hear a sound from him, not even his giant footsteps echoing through the floor. Except occasionally, I hear this loud buzzing. It goes on for about an hour, but not every time he has one of his little house parties. But about a month ago, I started noticing these strange markings in everyone's right forearm. Whether it was just a friendly wave, a handshake, a high five, all my neighbors had one of these markings. Also, the other night while I was in bed, I heard this scratching. Caleb was asleep and wild animals didn't lurk around here often. I didn't get up as I was too lazy, but it kept on for 15 minutes or so. The next morning, I noticed the symbol that was on everyone's wrist was carved into my door. I was terrified. As I opened the door to check though, 2 flyers slipped from the crack of my door. A missing dog flyer, and a cookout invitation. We've been trying to reach you about your cars. I hung up. Who on earth is even falling for these scam calls? It's always the same robotic voice. I don't even own a car. I bike to my classes. If they had even a slightly intelligent scammer behind that phone, you'd think they'd at least check if their unlucky victim had a car. Everyone's gotten their share of spam calls before if they've had a cell phone. It's a 21st century universal experience. On top of that, everyone and their mother has had the whole car's extended warranty scheme pulled on them at least once or twice. Or if you're me, I guess, and they call you every other minute. My phone had started ringing again as I was sitting there at my desk thinking about it. I glanced down and saw a number I didn't recognize, so I hit decline. I have work I need to get done. Regardless of my silent prayers that my phone would remain quiet, it kept going off. My ringtone kept greeting me every time I thought it was over. I snatched up my phone off my desk and answered. What? We've been trying to reach you about your bikes. I hung up after hearing most of that. It wasn't until I put my phone back down that I realized the robotic droning on the other end had said bike, not car. I found myself eyeing my phone wearily. I waited for the call, but this time, it seemed that I had warded the caller off, so I decided I had misheard it. The stress of college probably getting to me. I'm sure it said car. My ringtone started going off again the next morning, waking me up before my alarm could. I was too exhausted to notice that it was an unknown number. I just flipped over and grabbed it off the nightstand, putting it up to my ear. Hello? My own groggy voice was met with silence for an uncomfortable amount of time. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, listening, but all I could hear on the other end was breathing. Confused, I checked the ID and saw the unrecognizable number. I was about to just hang up when I heard that voice again. We've been trying to reach you about your bike's extended warranty. If it continued talking, or I hung up right away, I can hardly remember. I was sure then that the robot had said bike. I guess I had complained before about how I didn't even own a car, and that they should research their victims, but that wasn't what I thought was going to happen. It's just a coincidence. It has to be. Once I turned back in, I had already hung up without thinking. Sighing, I recalled where my bike was chained up outside in front of my dorm. Maybe I should walk to class, just for a few days. That's exactly what I did. It was kind of a pain, and I ended up being late a couple times, but the little anxious itch in the back of my head was scratched. I was a little relieved when I hadn't received any new calls yet. Maybe that was the right decision, until my phone started ringing again. I flipped it over from where it lay face down on my desk and saw the number. It was the same area code as the rest of the calls, 811. Not that it had a location listed under the number. I clicked accept and put the phone up to my ear. Just like the previous time, there was the sound of quiet breathing until the familiar voice chimed at me. We've been trying to reach you about your extended life warranty. I dropped my phone. I've never hit the end call button so fast in my life. The phone lay flat on the carpeted dorm room floor as I sat opposite from it at my desk. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. Extended life warranty? It started ringing again. I didn't touch it, but it kept ringing. Finally, I slowly reached down, turning it over. At that point, I made an incredibly foolish decision. I tapped accept, but I wasn't greeted by the same robotic voice as always. Instead, there was a person. Why did you pick up? I stared down at my phone, not saying anything. I didn't know what to tell the woman on the other end. I could hear her breathing heavily, as if she had just ran to the phone. It was a familiar breathing pattern. Why did you pick up? She screamed into the receiver, making me flinch with how loud it was. They're going to come for you now. What? Was all I could remember mustering up. It was hard to speak with my heart pounding into my throat. I tried to warn you. God. The woman cut herself off. I stayed quiet. Suddenly, she screamed. It was shrill and long. The sound started to garble as if the reception was cutting out. It was turning robotic, more familiar until it finally ceased. The call didn't end. I watched as the timer displayed on my screen continued to tick up. Each second that passed felt like days. I slowly extended my arm, aiming to end the call with as much caution as possible. But that voice spoke again. This is a final courtesy call before we terminate your warranty. I tapped the red button on my screen. No sooner than I did, however, there was a knock on my door. I held my breath. I began to scoot away from my desk in the chair, grabbing my laptop off my desk and trying to reach the window as silently as possible. There was another knock. I held my breath. The knocks turned into pounding. I didn't dare to move an inch anymore. My phone started ringing again. I was several feet away from it, so I didn't even try to see who was calling, just in case it was someone else. But I didn't have to check. It picked up by itself. We are afraid your warranty has been terminated. Open up. I didn't move. The pounding on the door began to become slamming, as if someone was throwing their entire body weight against the door. I chewed on the inside of my cheek to keep myself quiet, so hard that I could feel blood start to trickle into my mouth. The slams were only growing louder and louder with each passing second. Let us in. Your warranty must be terminated. Open the door. The robotic voice droned on from my phone. I continued to stay as silent as possible, curled up in a ball in my desk chair. I didn't move a muscle. It must have been hours. The sun was starting to set through my window, but I still didn't budge. I was terrified, and then my savior arrived. The door opened. I thought I was done for, but it was just the guy in the dorm across the hall from mine. I straightened up so quickly that my laptop nearly fell to the floor. I scrambled to grab it as the guy leaned against the door. I didn't know his name, but he was giving me a weird sort of look. Are you okay in there? I thought I heard something hitting the door, he said, eyeballing me. I managed to give him a weak smile. I'm fine, thanks. How was he going to believe me if I told him the truth? If you're sure, keep it down. You're gonna disturb somebody. He shut the door and went back to his room. It was quiet. The call had ended. I'm sitting on my bed now, writing out everything that happened in this past week or so. It's been maybe an hour since my neighbor left, and I haven't heard anything since then. I'm praying whatever was coming for me is done now, but who knows? I'm going to get a new phone for sure. I'm typing this on my laptop since I'm sort of scared to touch my phone, pathetically enough. I think I'm going to get a roommate next year as an extra safeguard. Someone who will overhear everything as well, hopefully. Convince me I didn't hallucinate the whole thing or something. I think I'm safe now. But if I get any more calls at all, I'm going to block them immediately. I recommend all of you do the same. If you've never lived with a huge body of water at your back, you'll never really get the Great Lakes. People from outside the region think they're just like any of their friendly little local lakes. And they're wrong. They are a sea unto themselves. They are massive living things. You hear old sailors talk about their awe of the ocean, the reverence for its indifferent violence, for its depths. The ocean is our mother. Well, we grew our first lungs and legs to have her. And when we return still thinking of the woman who raised us, we are confronted with a stranger. Part of being human is to forget and then learn all at once again. The cruelty of water. I live on the eastern side of Lake Michigan. My childhood home is right on the water. We get some of the worst rip currents in the lake system. When the wind planes over the water in such a way that the tide sucks you down into it, everybody knows someone who's drowned or almost drowned, mostly kids. For my part, I know a lot of drowners. I hate it here. I truly do. You hear that from most people who get trapped in their hometowns all their lives, but I think I'm more entitled to my resentment than most. I couldn't have been older than 6, so I don't remember much of it, but when I was little, I drowned. Most of the time when that happens, it's kids who don't know better, goofing off near a sandbar and getting pulled under. You see, the rip current makes the surface of the water go smooth, and especially on the lake where the water is always choppy, it makes a tempting sight for a child who isn't the strongest swimmer. I wasn't. I liked the water at that age, according to my mother, but what I would really do is go and splash around it with my arm floaters on. I couldn't have ever been prepared. What does stick in my mind was the moment it happened. I was running over to my friend Kathy through what looked like shallow, calm water, and when I went to put my foot down, the lake decided to take me. Currents are stronger the deeper you go. I remember the undertow yanking me down, doing somersaults in the dark. I'd scream before going down, so my mouth was open to receive every ounce of lake that could fit into me. Obviously, they pulled me out and squeezed all the water out of me. I lived, but at a cost. I have chronic pneumonia. I'm physically weaker than any other women my age due to lung and nerve damage. I stayed out of the water for a long time. The first time I knew for sure I had to get out of here, I was 14. Being sick from a young age makes you realize things that don't normally settle in for most people until their 50s. Being born is a death sentence, and my body is falling apart. I tried not to be a downer with other people because I already had enough trouble at school being disabled, but it did give me an early appreciation for psychoactives. I was friends with Henry because his older brother had cheap weed, and he was good for edibles. For obvious reasons, I tried not to smoke. We would walk around town high as hell, go down to the shore and kick litter around in the weeds. Sometimes a group of us, sometimes just me and him. In my memory, it wasn't so much that we were particularly close. Kids just pick people to hang around. I think he liked that I laughed at his stupid jokes. The pot made me giggly. It was dead summer, muggy air, and Michigan mosquitoes. The only place you could go to get away from the heat was by the water where the rolling breeze kept you cool. We had a little spot, a patch of shore where the reeds and yellow grass didn't encroach on the sand. Weeds rippled beneath the waves like tiny, grasping hands. "It's too goddamn hot," Henry said for the 2 millionth time, like I hadn't heard my dad say the same thing all week. "It's the global warming," I replied. He was further down the shore, close to the lapping water. I'd sat up on a log with my cane on my lap, watching the sand fleas. It was never this hot when we were little. You remember that? I'd remember it getting to be 99 degrees outside. You would, maybe. I can't even remember what I ate this morning. I rolled my eyes at him. Yeah, well, you wouldn't. He grinned back at me over his shoulder, plucking at his sweaty shirt. I was tired in that soft, slow, wispy way, between being high out of my mind and being baked much more literally by the August sun. I remember thinking he was going to ask me to be his girl, that it had been leading up to this. I wouldn't have minded, maybe even wanted it a little. He didn't. Henry pulled off his shirt and threw it at me and said, "You sure you don't want to come?" I told him yes, I was sure. I bundled up his shirt in my arms. He shrugged and jumped in. The dark water of the shallows splashed like an actual cannonball had fallen in. Henry didn't come back up. Unable to comprehend, I watched the spot for a while. How long could Henry hold his breath? He shouldn't have been able to sink very deep from where we were on the shore. I knew something was wrong, and the longer I sat there staring, the worse it would get, but I couldn't will myself to move. My body was heavy with dread, with the oppressive weight of being stoned. I woke up there. Or, not quite there. I woke up in the water, soaked up to my shoulders by an incoming wave. Henry's shirt was still balled up in my hands, turned from orange to bloody red by the tide. I looked around for him and saw nothing but weedy beach all around. I dropped his shirt and left it there. Even moving my leg hurts, and I needed all my strength to brace the pain. On the walk home, my shoes were heavy with water the whole way. A dark red bruise circled my ankle like a ligature or grasping hand. His parents and the local cops organized a search, and they knew I was probably the last to see him, so I lied and said we'd split up on the way home. I said maybe he went back to the shore. When I remembered that shirt, it felt like a godsend. I got to tell them that he went back for it, and I walked home alone. And they found it right there on our patch of lake. I don't know why. I don't know why I lied. Except that I thought I'd go to jail or something for not helping. Like it would be my fault that I couldn't go in after him. Anyway, they fished him out eventually. It looked like he'd gotten tangled up in seaweed and drowned himself trying to get free. If it gets wrapped around your ankle and you try to tug yourself out, it'll only tie tighter and drag you down. My parents knew something was wrong. For Dad, this manifested as concern, checking up on me, trying to take me to movies on the weekend. You know, Dad stuff. For my mother, she became clingy. She was religious. She went out to the lake every morning to pray. She'd been baptized in these waters, and so had I. And Christ would wash away our sins and blah blah. Getting me to come and pray with her became her mission for the rest of the summer, so she could wash away the unholiness that had settled upon me. I didn't go. My dad was always really supportive. I mean, he got it. He wasn't local like my mother. She lived in the same area basically her whole life. Well, he'd moved around everywhere before settling down with her. We were really close. He took to my physical therapy and piano, and we watched movies together when I was sick. On my side with my chest and throat coated in Vicks, and him bringing us hot tea and ginger soup. He helped me write my college essays, and when I got a full ride to a university out of state, it doesn't matter anymore where or for what. He couldn't have been prouder. Neither of my parents had gone to college. He kept telling me I was really going to make something of myself. He drove me down there and moved me into my dorm while my mother sulked at home. I remember I was on the edge the whole time in a way I couldn't explain. It was a smell, landlocked, but the whole time he was helping me take my stuff inside, I could smell brine. I thought something of mine had gotten wet somehow and gotten mildewed. Dad didn't notice anything. I didn't bring it up to him. Thought he would worry and it would mess this up for both of us. It was already so hard to believe. He gathered me up close in the parking lot as I was walking him out, and he asked me, "You feel ready, Junebug?" I said I did. He went home, and that wet smell went with him. Maybe it was in the car, or in his clothes, I thought. He was a strong swimmer. He loved the water. He never would have done something as stupid as jumping into the lake in the middle of the night. I got the call 3 weeks into my first semester, telling me that he'd washed ashore a little ways down the coast. I had to drop out. My mother was inconsolable and needy, and it was soon enough in the semester to cancel without any penalties. Next year, I promised myself. I had plenty of time. Next year turned into the year after that. Then I was halfway through my 20s. It was never the right time. My mother always needed me, financially or emotionally. I got a job in town, of course, got a cheap car like a token attempt at independence. She couldn't make me go to church or wake up at sunrise any more than she could when I was a child. But even if she gave up on my soul, she wouldn't give up on my wallet. My life was a dim, algae creeping malaise before I met Mitch. I worked at the back office of a gardening supply company, and he was our mail guy every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. He came by the office window in the afternoons and chatted me up while I got the overnight shipping together for him. I'd forgotten how it felt to meet someone, not just exist in their proximity, but to be with them. Work chats became shared lunch breaks, Sunday coffee dates, movies, driving out to the city to find a nice restaurant. Mitch was a gentleman. He liked fishing and chick flicks. He didn't look at me like a lame dog in the road when I went out with crutches. Both of us together couldn't afford a place of our own, and he couldn't get me on the lease with his roommates even if I had wanted him to. When we got married, he said to me once, we'd have our own place if he had to build it himself. That was his way of proposing, lobbing it up in the air for me to take as I might. I said I'd hold the nails for him, but there was still the issue of water between us. The first time he stayed at my mother's house, at my house, it was on the verge of a summer storm. A hurricane had come down on the East Coast, and we were bound to feel the ripples of it. How many storms had I lived through until now? I just had a feeling about this one. This dread. This briny smell in my nose all day as the clouds stifled the sky. Like an idiot, I asked Mitch to stay the night. He met my mother. She hated him. He dragged my queen bed out of the wall so we could climb on it, and left the window cracked. For tornadoes, he said. For the air pressure. With the window open even a little, the storm's wailing came right inside. Rain and wind, rattling the trees and the pier. Looks like it's getting bad out there. Could be the big one, he teased. I told him I didn't find it funny. I didn't want to think about what might happen. He kissed my head and apologized. Sleep stole my memories. I don't know how I got to rest at all with the storm howling the way it did. Knowing the lake was right outside and leaping up to meet me. I remember a lot of things from that night so perfectly, but I don't remember my dream. It was only as I was surfacing from the dark that I heard his voice. He whispered to me, just on the verge of awareness. You sure you don't want to come? I woke up with something wrapped around my ankle. It was too cold to be a tongue. I couldn't process it so soon after waking, and just pulled my foot away by instinct, still half asleep. The cold, wet thing dragged over my foot and off my skin. There was a noise then. Some kind of, I don't know, a hiss or a sigh. It was quick and quiet and sounded like the air between gritted teeth or the squeak of a window being shut fast. It jolted me awake. Pulse speeding up, I stared around. In the dark, scattered with cloud-choked moonlight, nothing seemed real. No more noises. Total silence. I rubbed my ankle and shivered. My skin was cold to the touch. Was it always so dark at night? I braced a foot on the floor, anxious to hit the light, and yanked my leg back up, cursing, fuck. Wet rug. I tried again and stood up, head swimming. The floor was soaking. Were we flooding somehow? Had the storm raised the lake to my doorstep to swallow me? I stumbled across the floor, splashing through a thin puddle on the hardwood until I get to the light switch. Skidding, I slammed into the wall and fumbled for the light. There was still nothing but the dark and wet. My vision went sideways and I hit the ground. My head whistled past the bedside drawer and barely missed cracking my skull open in the dark. I was yelling for Mitch, groping around for the silhouette of the bed and struggling just to get to my feet. I found the sheets and they were squishy, waterlogged. I couldn't tell the difference at first between them and his skin. That's when I started screaming. I'm so grateful that I could see him because he felt like I could tear through his skin like a swollen pepper. My mother found me scrambling around blind for my inhaler. The crying had choked me until instinct kicked in. She pointed a flashlight in my face. behind the beam of light. She was a faceless god putting me on trial. She grabbed my arm and shook me. "You went to bed alone," she kept saying. "You went out to the pier to fish before the storm came in. Do you understand? You went to bed early waiting for him to come inside. Are you listening to me?" I was listening. I didn't know why she was coaching me. I was suffocating on my own fluids and she wouldn't let me use my inhaler. The interrogation finally stopped and the light moved on. She left me curled up in the dark to take my medicine. His body thumped when it hit the carpet, and again I thought about rotten vegetables. The sound an overripe melon makes when it liquefies and splits. Lucky for her, my bedroom was on the ground floor to spare me the stairs. I coughed myself sideways and laid there for God knows how long before she came back. She dragged me to the couch and told me to stay there while she took care of things. She always took care of things. The police took one look at me when they came around, my feeble little body and swollen, wet face, and they said, "Well, ain't it a tragedy?" I hated her. She hovered around in the doorway watching for any sign of betrayal, and I knew it was her. She had taken Mitch and Dad, and somehow she had taken Henry. She had taken me, too small to understand, and trapped in this body I hated, and this town I despised. I knew it. I knew her. I wished the lake would take her. And then it did. 7 a.m., visiting with the water as per routine. I looked up when I heard her yelp, like she'd been bitten. She was already on her side in the sand. A dark, shiny thing had her leg in its grip. Her eyes only had a second to bulge at me, hateful. Then she slid into the water with barely a splash. I didn't quit my job. I didn't talk to anybody. I threw a handful of clothes in my back seat and left. I felt like the girl from Psycho, you know, at the beginning of the movie. Guilty runner, nowhere to run to. And then, fuck, at the southern edge of Illinois, the rain started back up again. I pulled over to a motel and stayed the night. The sound of the shower woke me up. The drumbeat of water on the tile, like sheets of rain. I lay frozen in bed, heaped with cheap hotel duvets, staring at the bathroom door. It had been left open a crack, golden light pouring into my dark room. I could see wisps of steam curling in the sliver of light, making the air taste wet. More than anything, I wanted to go back to sleep. Of course I was afraid, but it was a numb fear, the kind that comes over you without even the decency of giving you a shot of adrenaline. What else could I do? I'd already run away, and it had found me here. Might as well roll over and get some sleep. I forced myself upright, trying not to creak the bed or rustle the sheets too loudly. The shitty carpet squished wetly between my toes. Flooded. Yes, now I could see the water pouring slowly out from under the bathroom door, sloshing out from an overflowing tub. The lake was there. I couldn't make out anything distinct behind the bubble glass of the shower door, and the steam fog gathered on it. Just a dark shape, rendered deep algae green by the barren fluorescent light, rising and falling with breaths drowned out by the patter of the shower water. It hadn't taken me. I was here, and it hadn't taken me. It never had, no matter how much I wanted it to. "Hello?" I said stupidly, not sure what else to say. It rumbled a bit before it spoke. "You feel ready, Junebug?" It asked with my dad's voice. With my mother's it asked, "Do you understand?" I did. We came to an agreement, the lake and I. Hey, I'm not sure if this story is interesting, but I wanted to share. I'm a 35-year-old woman who works comfortably in an office job. I have a nice home, I hang out with friends, I work out, And I make up excuses to why I can't work out today, but definitely will tomorrow. I'm mostly normal, average even. I'm not fishing for compliments, I just know what I am. But I can't keep a guy around. I didn't even know how to start meeting good guys until a few years ago with the boom of the dating apps. Just in case this is being read years in the future, or the past, who knows what's gonna happen. But in the mid-2010s, it became totally normal to meet people online for all various levels of intimacy. You want a simple date? There's an app. You want a full-on relationship? There's an app. You want to just hook up? No worries. There's an app. All up and down the line. And most of the time it was alright. Occasionally you'd find someone who was looking for more or less than you, but most of the time it was just fine. The worst, of course, were the liars and the lunatics. I had to deal with a lot of 5'6" guys telling me they were 6 feet tall. A lot of guys using photos from their high school years when the hair was bountiful and the chins were singular. Not that I have an issue with any of these, just don't try to hide it. Now, just so you know about me, I'm a normal looking girl. I'm not going to turn heads and I'm not going to make you divert your eyes in disgust. Like most women, I wish I was taller, thinner, and had better boobs and a bigger ass, etc. But I also love to eat and not work out, so, what can I expect? See, I'm honest. After striking out a few times, I'd even had some friends look at my profiles. They'd try to jazz it up, but I wanted people to know what they were getting. I'm an average girl with an appetite for life who doesn't want to be alone anymore. Then, of course, you had the straight-up lunatics. I've had several dates where guys were mostly interested in seeing my toes. One was interested in putting my toes in his ears. One man asked if I could record myself snoring. A few really just wanted to have sex in the bathroom. One wanted to have sex on the bar. I said no to all of those things. I'm not here to shame anyone. It's just that it's a lot for a first date with a stranger. And I don't mind the random one-offs, but those can be costly. Too many of those can weigh you down, you know? The whole dating experience wasn't all awful. I had a few great ones. First, there was Sam. He was so sweet. We went out and immediately hit it off. He took me bowling, which was surprisingly fun. He was kind and cute. I took him back to my place and had my way with him. He was amazing and really showed me how great these apps can be. But that lasted about a week. Then he was just gone. And I was alone again. Which brings me to Bill. Bill was a rough one. On our date, he took me to honest-to-goodness rodeo bar. We drank too much and tried the mechanical bull. The thing launched my ass almost immediately. Bill lasted for a while and then went down hard. He fractured his arm right there, but he didn't want the night to end. We went back to my place for dessert, but just like Sam, in a few weeks he was gone. These were two of several success stories, but that's not why you're here. You want me to go back to the lunatics, so here's the worst one. John. John was your average liar and lunatic. His profile said he had an explosive personality. His photos said he had lots of hair and a beard and muscles. All false. We went out to eat at an average restaurant. He ordered a forgettable meal and drank table water with it. He essentially looked and acted like a Lego person. Just a blank nothing with some stray hairs around the top. The date was going nowhere fast. He didn't ask any questions and all of mine received one-word answers. He walked me to my car and I quickly slipped in, saying bye as I drove off. That was supposed to be the end of the date. I went home, drank half a bottle of wine, and passed out in my bed with my vibrator. I woke up hours later to the sounds of pans clanging in my kitchen. I shot up out of bed and went downstairs. The house was dark and I could feel my skin crawling, like I knew something was wrong before I knew what was wrong. The kitchen light was on, and it smelled like bacon. My kitchen is small. You walk in, and there's an island in the middle with cabinets underneath. On the other side is the stove/oven, the fridge, and John cooking something. John was wearing only my apron and cooking bacon. His lower half was covered by my kitchen island, but I could tell there was nothing else on him. Hello? I muttered. I should have screamed something more threatening, but the whole situation was so surreal. Honey, you're awake. He turned a smile, ear to ear. I was about to wake you, sleepyhead. I wouldn't want you missing today. His smile never broke, even when he shouted as he went back to cooking. I felt like I was dreaming. It's 2 in the morning, John. What are you doing here? Wait, how do you know where I live? I wish that I had a weapon, my vibrator, a bra on, anything. Honey, you're killing me. What am I doing here? This is my house. Where else would I be? Would you like some juice? Sure enough, there was a glass that resembled orange juice on the island. I didn't keep juice in the house. Funny joke. Please leave now or I'll... I started to approach him when slam. He whacked my skillet onto the counter so hard he cracked the tile. I work so hard for this family. Here I am making you breakfast on our 35th wedding anniversary, and you can't even sit and drink your juice? He shouted. His face was turning red, but his smile never faded. I can't believe you made me raise my voice like that. He then returned to his usual tone, especially in front of Tiffany. Who the hell is Tiffany? I shouted. Honey, you're a riot. Don't tell me you forgot today was our daughter's birthday. John took his hand off the pan and reached down. He pulled up the body of a woman. She was very pretty and around my age. She was clearly drugged as he flung her onto the kitchen island. She let out a soft groan. Now, Tiffany. Surely Mommy is kidding. She knows today is a special day. He took out a knife and held it to Tiffany's neck. Mommy knows today is special, and trying to leave the house today will make Daddy very unhappy. His smile never faded. Now, Mommy, drink your juice. I did not want this woman to die in my kitchen. I also didn't want to drink that definitely not juice. I walked up my kitchen island. The bacon was burning at this point. I quickly tried to assess my situation. John was naked with my apron on. He had at least a knife. Tiffany was dressed and alive, but not completely with us. She was bound at the wrists and ankles. I was armed with my knowledge of my own home and abilities. That juice was definitely not juice. I walked up to the cup. My hands were honestly trembling, so my dropping it looked fairly natural. He froze and turned slowly. Rage in his eyes, smile plastered to his face. Sweetie. I cooed, trying to get ahead of the situation. Can you stop cooking bacon? I don't like my food overcooked. His look softened. He looked at the near cremated scraps in my pan. He smacked his forehead playfully as if he forgot. Duh, he chuckled. Of course, honey. Let me pour you a new drink. I walked around the island so I was next to him. He was fully erect under the apron. He went to get another glass. I'll get the broom for the glass. I shouted as I started to turn away. You'll sit the fuck down and do what you're told, he shouted. Tiffany groaned. You hear that, honey? Tiffany doesn't like it when Mom tries to leave Daddy. He placed the knife again on her neck. And we don't want her to cry, do we? I sat down at the island. No, sweetie, we don't want that. He relaxed and went back to the oven. You know, I can always go to... Go? John shouted. Why do you women always have to go? I'm trying to make a beautiful Christmas dinner and everyone always wants to go. He threw the replacement glass against the wall. Honey, it is a mess in here. Pick up the glass with your fingers while you still have them. I froze in shock. Now, he shouted. I jumped and started to pick up the tiny shards of glass. I started to cry, not because of the pricks I got from the glass, but because I hated feeling this helpless. By the time I was done, John was standing over me. I tried to change the story. Wow, sweetie, you really are such a big, strong man. You do such a great job providing for me and... Fuck. I forgot her name. Tiffany, he screamed. How do you forget your own daughter's name? All of you bitches are so self-centered. Here I am, a nice guy who works hard, and I get nothing. He was now groping Tiffany with one hand while lightly scraping the knife along her back. I'm glad she was barely conscious for this. You have me? I screamed again, trying to play along. I didn't want anyone to die in my kitchen. You have me and this beautiful house that you built. He stopped with the knife and took his hand off her. He never stopped smiling. It's time for my present, he hissed. For our anniversary? No, it's my birthday, John again shouted. He went into a brief rage and sliced Tiffany's cheek. She started to wake up a bit. I can't believe how awful of a wife you are. Do you know how many other women have died because they weren't special like you? So many. His face was blood red, but he never stopped smiling. But you're just like the others, and I need to teach you a lesson. I need to give you my present. He grabbed Tiffany by the hair and dragged her. He grabbed my hair and did the same. He opened the door to my pantry and slammed it shut. He dragged us into the living room, but a car drove by, illuminating the room for a moment. No, not in here, he muttered. Where can a man do some thinking around here? He shouted. He started to rub his still hard junk on Tiffany's face through my apron. The basement, sweetie. At the end of the hall. I stammered. I know where my own goddamn basement is, he shouted back. He dragged me and Tiffany into my basement. He had trouble opening the heavy door, but he managed. I knew the game was almost up with him, and if something didn't happen soon, I would be dead. He kept muttering to himself about how underappreciated he is. After decades of hard work trying to build a family, this is how you treat me? I had one last move to pull. Sweetie, we were just kidding. Tiffany and I didn't forget about your birthday. Your present is in your man cave. I indicated the door to the basement. He stopped holding the knife to Tiffany, who was starting to come around. It is? He was puzzled, but then remembered his own sick fantasy and corrected himself. Of course it is, he said pleasantly. He dragged us over to the door. And this present better be everything I want. He caressed himself and licked the knife. You'll see. I don't want to ruin the surprise. I spat out. Let's go. As a family. He dragged us to the door. I want to always remember this perfect moment. He stopped talking when he opened the door and the light automatically turned on. What the hell? He let go of Tiffany and me and started to dry heave. The cold air of my walk-in freezer wafted over us, as did the smell. I took this opportunity to lunge, mouth open, and took a bite out of his throat. I gulped it down and he looked at me in shock. I grabbed what little hair he had left and yanked him back like a Pez dispenser. I took 2 more big bites out of his neck and let him fall to my floor. Like I said, I don't like my food overcooked. John clearly was not expecting to see the bodies of my previous dates. There were a few in there. Most of them have been eaten down to the bone, but I recognized Billy by his broken arm. As John convulsed, gurgling blood, I took another bite out of his neck. I'm an emotional eater. I now had 2 problems. The first was that my freezer was getting full from these dates, and I hate to see some food wasted. The second was Tiffany. Well, the poor girl should not have been dragged into this. She not only saw my pantry full of dead men, but saw me eat a guy. As a feminist, I've never eaten a woman before, so I don't know what to do. Tiffany, who was now fully back with us, started to talk. "Okay," Tiffany muttered. "Now I understand why you didn't call the cops." I chuckled in acknowledgement. "I just want to go home," Tiffany said as she undid her bindings. "I didn't see anything. I don't know you. I don't know where I am, and I just want to leave. My name isn't Tiffany. You don't know me. We are strangers. I just worked with that guy. He used to leer at me every day. We had a company hour, and he drugged me. He threw me in a trunk and called me Tiffany. I don't care what you do with him." She started to stand up. "Just let me leave. I'll never come back. Swallow him whole if you can. No one will miss him." I remained silent, contemplating the ifs. She started to back away and then turned to run. She was still a little drugged, or she might have been faster. She made it to the stairs before I got her. I took her down swiftly and aggressively. I immediately bit her ankle tendon to keep her from running. I then dug into her midsection teeth first. I was so stuffed when she finally stopped squirming that I had to undo the drawstring on my PJs. I didn't want her to die in my kitchen. I didn't mind if she died in my basement. She knew John. Even if she didn't tell anyone right away, there's too much of a connection. And well, he was eaten is a tough story to sell to law enforcement. If he gets reported missing, and they reach out to people in the office, and if someone saw John and Tiffany leave and only one comes back, it could be enough to crack her. I would have to move, and how many houses have a storage freezer in their soundproof basement? In this economy, it would be a whole thing. Eating Tiffany just made things easier. Sorry, Tiffany, but you had to be dessert. I woke up the next morning in a haze. I was in a food coma and bloated as hell. Thankfully, it was a Saturday, so I had the whole weekend to meal prep. While cooking John, I rummaged through his wallet. I found a business card indicating that he worked in an office park across town. I drove his shitty car there, walked a few blocks, and then ordered a cab home. I'm sure John and Tiffany will be reported, but there's nothing to connect them back to me, just like my other dates. I then spent the rest of the weekend cleaning and eating. John might have been the worst, but he tasted amazing. Even though I like to spread out my dates, every time I thought of what John did to me, I would eat more of him, even if I was already stuffed. Like I said, too many one-night stands can really weigh you down. Tomorrow, I'm definitely going to work out. I also updated my online dating profile. I am now fully open to meeting up with women. Tiffany was delicious, and the way I figure it is that as a feminist, I'm an equal opportunity eater. And couples, for cheat days. Sure, I may be different, but at least I'm not a liar. I'd dream about Sarah dropping her phone. She'd shatter her screen a few days later. Dream about her firing a coworker before hearing about it over dinner. Small, insignificant things that I thought just meant we were close. Everyone has weird premonitions about family and loved ones. I have family that are into new age/supernatural stuff, and suggested we had a soul tie that expressed itself as premonitions. Too bad I couldn't premonition her dumping me. We stayed friends. It was good, but the dreams kept going too. Dreams about crashing her car, breaking her arm, her grandmother passing away. All happened. I decided to write these things out of me instead of constantly stressing and being a toxic person, checking in on her. I probably wrote one dream in my journal 10, 20 times before it manifested. Sarah's watching TV on the couch in her apartment. This living shadow, like a man-shaped tornado of embers and ash, appeared next to her. It pulls the move on her, wrapping its appendage around her and dragging her in tight. She sighs happily, then she starts to fade like fog on a window. I can see more and more of the pattern on the couch behind her. She tries to stand up, but the thing forces her back down. It gets darker and more defined as she fades away. She breaks free and screams for help, but it grabs her. Her eyes erupt in embers and scarlet flames erupt through her translucent form, spilling out of her mouth, burning and cracking her cheeks and lips. She burns, painfully, slowly, blisters forming all over her body, popping into jets of dark red flame. Her skin boils off of her, chunks fall off completely, letting her boiling fat ooze out from underneath. Something changes in her stance. The fire flares and she shrinks in, bending at the knees, her elbow retracting, shoulders back. She looks like she's going to fight someone as she dies. The shadow claws playfully at her as my friend burns from the side. It catches her ashes like snowflakes. It rolls in her fluids, rubs the ash on what counts as a face. It starts grasping at her remains faster and faster, overturning furniture and scraping the ash off furniture to get more of the stuff. It sinks to its knees, clawing apart pieces of the rug as Sarah ends. When it has the carpet out of the way, it draws what looks like a magic circle, like Full Metal Alchemist on Doctor Strange or something, on the concrete beneath like padding. Then it looks at me. Every other dream, I'm just a bystander, third person, like playing a video game. The demon knows I'm there. It opens what counts for a mouth and spits a tongue of flames at my eyes. I feel heat and wake up grasping for breath. Sometimes I scream. Once or twice I cried. It's absolutely ridiculous, and not like the other dreams, so there's obviously no way it's real. But I still felt it in my heart. It meant something. Symbolically, I was right. 5 months later, an arsonist torched half her apartment building. She was unaccounted for. A little part of me died when her mom, Karen, called and told me, offered to let me be a pallbearer. Because we had such a beautiful friendship, they let me sit with them in the first pew at the funeral home, right beside her new boyfriend Sam. He was a manager at a small, family-owned grocery store, and was regularly rude to me when we bump into each other, even before dating my ex. Now, he seems to hate my guts, won't make eye contact, won't speak to me. He snatched Elliot, Sarah's youngest brother in kindergarten, right out of my lap when the kid clambered onto me, crying. The service was beautiful, though. Closed casket, lilies. 3 weeks ago, I dreamt of Sam. It's dark at the cemetery. The moon's new, dark, and a heavy fog is trying its best to choke out the light from the lampposts around the graveyard. Sam glances around before pulling the hood off his jacket before his head as he approaches Sarah's plot. He kneels at the edge, whispering something as he unloads his backpack. He dumps a long knife, a weird oblong triangle with a stick on the end, a black slab of glass that shines brightly despite the darkness, a bottle of ash, and a bundle of hair onto the grass. The triangle thing turns into a shovel when he pulls the stick on the back and makes sure the head is tight against the extendable pole. It doesn't move past the foot. Fucking cheap Amazon bullshit. After a few minutes of playing with the survival shovel and cutting himself on the serrated edge, Sam gives up and grabs the knife. He cuts a larger slash across his palm and flicks the blood across the grave, whispers something I can't understand, and locks his fingers together. Sarah's plot changes. I don't know what to call it other than quick dirt. It's fluid, but still packed earth, and the sparse grass that's grown over the month she's been buried. You can see it ripple as the wind blows across it. Something moves under the knot water. Sam murmurs again, and the thing shoots out like a dolphin breaching. Sam claps his hands together just before her casket hits the ground, and the quick dirt becomes earth again. He takes the glass, scratches something into it with his knife, and pops open the lid. I want to wake up. I don't want to see her like this. I want to remember her as Sarah, not an arson victim featured on the nightly news. But I can't control what I'm watching. So I'm forced to see Sam open her mouth, ignoring the bits of charred skin flaking off her jaw and lips, and stick the black stone between her teeth. He curses to himself, takes back the stone and dumps the bottle of ash on it, mixing it with bits of the hair, chanting again in that strange language. The stone glows brighter. He shoves it back in her mouth, smears blood across her lips, and speaks louder. Birds are screeching in the trees, stray cats and dogs hissing and yowling at the top of their lungs. Then she moves. It's not the shambling, graceless movement we see on TV. Sarah Zombie wobbles like a child, arms limp at her sides, pushing forward with her head, having to turn and look in a direction before moving in it. She tumbles out of her coffin, landing hard on her hip, which breaks with a sickening crack. She screams around the stone, which she can't seem to get out of her mouth. Sam pulls her to her feet and pushes her back, clearing his throat and wiping his hands on his pants. He tosses a thin black robe over her, then a rain jacket over that. She clambers away, looks more like a lost drunk than a reanimated corpse. My viewpoint turns to watch her leave, but something happens. She shifts, and she's my Sarah again. Healthy, alive, crying, scratching manically at black chains on her wrists, coiling up to her chest. They're the same as that stone. Some weird glowy black with little symbols etched on them. She looks at me and runs. The dream shifts. I'm outside my own apartment. She's there, scratching letters into the frame. Sarah moves to the doorknob, turning it slowly, powerfully. The cheap metal creaks as she dents it, attempting to break it off. Something primal goes off in me and I scream. Sarah startles, grips her head, and bites down hard on the stone in her mouth. She runs. I thought it was just an insane dream. Survivor's guilt, combining with my dislike of her boyfriend or something like that. But then the landlord called, absolutely pissed, asking who I'm in with. Said he didn't want any trouble in the complex, and if I was running with a gang or a cult or something, I needed to leave now. I didn't get it at first, reassured him I wasn't part of any social gatherings aside from weekly magic. Then I went to work, saw the weird runes carved into my door, and the long scratches in the wall leading towards it. Felt the contour of her fingers pressed into the metal of my doorknob. I haven't dreamt of Sam or Sarah since then. I've also not stopped researching since then. Gotta find some way to kill a necromancer. Or protect myself from him and break the soul tie. Or figure out what the hell a soul tie actually is, and then go fight a death wizard, or kill my door and break a death wizard and fix a soul tie, and I can't think straight. I haven't slept in 4 days, constantly worried about what's happening to her each night, driving myself crazy thinking I'll have another dream about her, and maybe find a different apartment.